this was number 20,
20 or 49.
49. They just want you to graph it?
Yeah.
Alright, so let's run through this. Good review if nothing else. How are we going to start graphing 5 cos pi x minus 3? Amplitude, period, phase shift. Right, that's kind of your 3 statistics that you want to start out with. As far as this minus 3 goes, what is that going to do? This is down 3, right? Since this is outside of the parentheses, it's a vertical shift. You'll apply this at the end. Outside, vertical shift. Which means at the beginning, I'm just going to focus on this function here. So I need to graph 5 cos pi x and then take that result and move it down 3. So amplitude, let's label A, B, and C. A is 5, B is the number in front of the x, which is pi. What about C? 0, right? The extra number that is usually added or subtracted inside the parentheses is 0 because there's nothing extra added or subtracted here. So now I can figure out my amplitude. Amplitude is just the absolute value of A, so it'll be 5. Period, what's the formula for that?
2 pi over pi.
2 pi over B, right? 2 pi over whatever's in front of the x. In this case, there's a pi, so 2 pi over pi. Also, I'm going to want my quarter period while I'm at it. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and take that period and cut it into 4 equal sectors. So 2 over 4, 1/2 is my quarter period. And because C is 0, the phase shift is usually C over B, so it'll be 0 over pi, which is 0. So I would graph this function first and then move it down. So how do I use these numbers to graph this function that's underlined in purple? Right, so 5 are my y values, up 5, down 5 from the axis.
Start in that.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then because it's a cosine graph, I'm going to start at maximum, right? So I'll start up here at a max. Cosine. And then to get my x values, I'm going to need to go quarter periods starting from x equals 0. Right? This is x equals 0, so this is where I start measuring. And then I go half a unit. So I guess this will be 1/2, 1, 3/2, 2. So I just counted using my quarter period, starting from 0, and then I added a half to get a half, then I added a half again to get 1, etc. Right, so you have to add your quarter period to your phase shift to get your x values. And then using the pattern for sine and cosine, well I guess it's cosine, so the pattern for cosine is max, 0, min, 0, max. So your cosine graph is going to look something like this. Is just the first part. So far so good? With me or against me? You want to fight? This is not a fight. It's like 1836 right now. So now we got to shift it, what, down 3? So normally, to shift it down 3, I guess there's a couple ways to think of it, but I like to think of where my x-axis will move. So instead of using the x-axis on the y equals 0 line, I'm going to shift down 3 and draw my new x-axis. Or at least that's the way you think of it. All the x values are going to stay the same. Right, you're going to keep 1/2, 1, 3/2, and 2. And then you're going to have to go 5 up and 5 down from your new x-axis. So starting from here, count 5 up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, brings me to 2. And count 5 down, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which brings me to negative 8. And then follow the same pattern. Cosine starts at a max. When it goes down to a 0, you're not going to hit the x-axis, you're going to hit the new x-axis. So max, 0, min, 0, max. So you, for all intents and purposes, you ignore this old x-axis. It's not important anymore. So this will be minus 3 on the end. 5 cos pi x. What else? What else gave you trouble in 6.4 or 6.6? I think you guys find the graphing easier than the identities and the unit circle and all that?
Yes.
Yeah? Did you guys have any problems reverse engineering the formula where they gave you the graph and you had to come up with a formula? Did you try any of those? Those are okay? I'm here for you. You know, if you need any, if you have any other questions.
Can you go over one?
If you find one for me.
I didn't bring anything.
Me neither. You got a book? Let's see. All right, let me pick one out real quick. They're a favorite problem of mine, so. All right, let's look at 64. Let's like turn to it. This is in 6.4 again. So they draw you a graph here. Draw it really quickly. Tick marks at, let's see, negative 4 pi, negative 2 pi, 2 pi, 4 pi, 6 pi, 8 pi, 10 pi. They go up and down between negative 4 and 4. Like. And they want you to come up with, find an equation for the graph. So they want you to come up with the equation for this graph. 10 pi. So to find the equation of a graph, normally you pick whether you're going to use sine or cosine, and then you try to figure out what A, B, and C are. Right? You reverse engineer. You go from here to here. As far as whether you should use sine or cosine, how do you tell that?
Where the graph starts.
If possible, I would pick sine or cosine so that you don't need a phase shift basically. Right? Normally sine starts at a 0. Right? Sine x usually starts at a 0. Meaning on the y-axis it's at a 0. So since this guy has a 0 on the y-axis, I would use sine. It's at 0. Y is 0 when x is 0. Starts at a 0. So that's the first thing to notice. If you started up here on the y-axis at a max, what would you use? Cosine. If you started here on the y-axis at a min, what would you use? Still cosine, but you'd have to flip it because it's negative. Because it's starting in min. So we're going to use sine, which means we're trying to fill in y equals a sine bx minus c. What's c going to be in this case?
0.
0, because it hasn't moved from its normal starting point. Sine usually starts at a 0. It still starts at a 0. So we don't even need to worry about this. We do need to worry about a and b. What do you think a is going to be?
4.
4. Why?
This is the
Because it goes up and down 4 from the y-axis. Or I'm sorry, from the x-axis. Up and down 4 on the y-axis. So then really the only tricky thing here is b. How do you find b?
2 pi.
B is related to the period. 2 pi over b is equal to the period. That's your formula. That has to do with b. So if you can look at the graph and figure out the period, then you can figure out what b is. So what's the period here?
10
8
pi.
pi. 2 pi. 8 pi.
8 pi. Why is the period 8 pi? So there's a couple of ways to look at it. One way is from a max to a max. Some people see that most easily. From this max here to this max here, you've gone 2 pi to 10 pi, which means you traveled 8 pi's. Another way is to start from this 0, but you can't just go to your next 0 because that's only graph half of the sine curve. So then you keep going until the 0 after that. From here to here is one full period, which is again 8 pi. So no matter how you look at it, you should get a period of 8 pi. So that should equal 2 pi over b. And then you just solve for b. The b comes up, the 8 pi comes down. B equals pi's cancel 1/4. Which means at the end of the day, since it said find an equation for this, you got to throw a and b into the right equation. So you'll put y equals 4 sine of 1/4 x. Give you one more quickly. Four. Here's -4 to -4 back here. Too much. Here's my graph. So these points here are meant to be at -1 on the y. And here's your min at -4 and your max at 2. Min at -4, max at 2. Min at -4. And we want to do the same kind of instructions, find the equation of the function. What seems to be the difference, or a couple of the differences between this picture and this picture?
It looks like it's
This guy starts at a min on the y-axis, so probably we're going to use cosine, negative cosine in fact, because it's flipped down to a min. All right, so that's one difference. What else?
It has two.
It's got two periods, graph, but that doesn't matter so much. What would you guys? I heard something else.
Vertical shift.
It's got a vertical shift in it. Right, it's not oscillating around the x-axis anymore, right? There's not as much of the graph up here as there is down here. There's more down here.
Phase shift.
No vertical shift.
Is there a phase shift?
No, because the minimum is on the y-axis, so I can start with cosine. Like that's how cosine usually starts. Max or min on the y-axis. If this minimum were moved over slightly, then it would have a phase shift.
What exactly is a phase shift again?
Phase shift. So, I guess we should have done one. Like if you started over here at pi over 6, and then graphed a sine graph. This guy has a phase shift of pi over 6 because the 0 is at pi over 6 instead of at the y-axis.
Okay.
Or similarly with cosine, if you had a cosine graph, and at pi over 6 you were at the max, say, up here, and then you went 0, min, 0, max.
Oh, okay.
It's pretty much a horizontal shift, right?
It's a horizontal shift, it is.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Now here, because we're at a minimum on the y-axis, that minimum hasn't been moved over, so we don't have a phase shift. But we are oscillating around the line y equals -1, so at the end of the day, when we build this equation, we're going to have to move everything down now. But before that, let's focus on amplitude and period. What's the amplitude here? The amplitude's 3. Right? Because you're oscillating 3 units up and down from this y equals -1 line. And that tells us immediately that a equals 3. Well, a equals -3 technically because it's been flipped. Right? Because we're starting right now. And then for b, we have to use the equation period equals 2 pi over b. What's the period in this case? 4. It's meant to be 4. This is supposed to be at 4. 0. So between 0 and 4, that's your two minimums. So that's when you start repeating after 4 units. So the period is 4. Which means you have to solve the equation 2 pi over b equals 4. The b comes up, the 4 comes down. 4b equals 2 pi. Divide the 4 down. B equals pi over 2, it looks like. 5a. I have b. I have no phase shift because we started at a minimum on the y-axis. So how can I write this equation? Yeah, so let's start with -3, right? Y equals -3, sine or cosine? Cosine, since it's a minimum, of pi over 2x. And then we're shifted down 1. So should I do this? No. Close the parentheses, down 1 has to be outside. -1 outside the parentheses.
I have a question, Josh.
Yes.
So, I get everything except for the period. How do you find that it's 2 pi? Okay, I know the formula is 2 pi over b.
Okay.
But what is that whole, can you explain the whole max thing again to me so I can see?
Yeah, so one way to find the period is to go between a max and a max or between a min and a min. It's a little bit easier to go between a min and a min in this case, but we can do max and max if you want.
Oh, okay.
So this max is here, this max is here.
Yeah.
So you just count 1, 2, 3, 4.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Period. Same thing if you went between a min and a min. Between here and here, you go 1, 2, 3. So that's why I said 4 equals to 2 pi over 1.